Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 6, I know that. Now, episode 6 of Depression Vacation. I'm Hal.
I'm Shannon.
And we're here to talk to you about things that are bumming us out for the next hour-ish. Yeah, because we took a vacation from talking about some forms of trauma last week. Although we still delved a lot into, the trauma behind The Shining and, other horror films, so...
Yeah, turns out, you tend to gravitate towards art that mimics life. It's crazy.
Yeah, in response, by the way, I did watch Hereditary this last weekend, because I actually took a real vacation
Nice.
from my problems, and I watched basically nothing but horror movies and drank beer every single night while I was down at the beach. Hereditary did not speak to me as much as I was hoping it would.
Man. That hurts me.
Yeah, it was interesting. It went in a different direction than I was expecting, but
That happened the same for all of us, dude.
the twist, if you could call it a twist, the whole thing.
Yeah.
It didn't really make me be. It wasn't like a Sixth Sense kind of. Oh man, I didn't see that coming. It was kind of yeah, I guess that's a thing that we're doing now. It was very scary. Toni Collette was very good, especially as the possessed woman. But yeah, I was even talking to my sister about this because she loved Hereditary too, and I was like, yeah, I was a little disappointed. It didn't speak to me as much as I was hoping it would.
Okay, well, you're wrong, and that's just how it is.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm okay being wrong occasionally.
No, I mean, the twist really kind of came out of nowhere for me. I definitely didn't see it coming, which, as I said before, is pretty amazing because I'm pretty good at picking up on that kind of thing. And then, like you said, Toni Collette did just such a good job. There was the one particular scene. I don't know if it's much of a spoiler alert, but it came out 4 or 5 years ago, something like that now. You've had time.
So we actually had this discussion last night because the improv show that Wallace and I do, we get a movie solicited suggestion, and Psycho was the one we took.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But some people hadn't actually seen Psycho, and I was like, well, spoiler for a 50-year-old movie.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the scene with the piano wire, that got me.
Yeah,
I was like, oh, shit, that's wild.
Yeah, it was very Terrifier level of gore. So.
Yeah. Maybe that's why I liked it. I don't know.
It was a good gory movie, and there were tonally it was very good. I actually really love Gabriel Byrne too, so it was a nice surprise to see him in a movie again because it feels like a long time since I've seen Gabriel Byrne in a real mainstream movie.
I don't think I've seen him in anything.
Oh man, Gabriel The Usual Suspects or
never saw it.
Oh, the Man in the Iron Mask.
I did see The Man in the Iron Mask, but that was a long time ago.
That's one of my favorite go-to movies because it's just the right level of
interesting.
It's not easy watching, but it's not hard watching at the same time. It's this nice little soft spot with a weirdly very impressive cast of people for everything, like John Malkovich, Jeremy Irons, and Gerard Depardieu out of nowhere. So
fair enough. That's good.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what else I watched. I did all of the Halloween movies that I could that were available on there. Because a lot of them, I used to be obsessed with the Halloween franchise when I was 14, but I hadn't seen a bunch of them in years. I hadn't seen Halloween 3, which is a much better movie as an adult, I'm going to agree with. But I also hadn't seen Halloween 6 since I owned it on VHS. And I remembered Paul Rudd was in it, but I didn't remember how hammy Paul Rudd was in that movie.
I didn't know Paul Rudd was in it.
Oh my God, it's so the plot of the movie was so bad that was the first time they rebooted the franchise was with H2O, where they just pretended that Halloween's 4, 5, and 6 didn't exist because it got so hackneyed with this plot of have you seen any of those ones, the 4, 5, 6?
No, I've literally only seen the original and then the most recent reboots, the first and second one. I haven't even seen Halloween Ends yet.
I guess horror movies are such a good conversation. They're bleeding into a second episode.
God. Well, we'll diverge. But first, with horror movies, what I do want to say is that I did watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre for the first time.
The very original one?
The very original one for the first time, 2 weeks ago, and I hated it.
It's a...
I didn't expect to hate it because I love slasher films. So I was like, oh, why do I hate this so much? And I just feel like there was no depth to it. And maybe that's the point of a slasher film, is not to have any depth. But I just did not enjoy any moment of watching that movie.
Yeah, when I first sought that out, my friends and I had to go to we had to drive to Maryland actually to rent it because a lot of blockbusters in the area, or not Maryland, but very close to the Maryland border. A lot of them wouldn't carry it because it was like a banned movie at the time, which is why we wanted to see it.
Of course.
I was a bit unimpressed with it, like, because I was expecting it to be a lot scarier than it was.
Yeah.
It's just a good, I think more than anything, it sort of falls like into the Clerk stratosphere, where it's a really good independent movie story, essentially, although apparently it was hell on earth shooting
I'm sure.
the movie. But one of my favorite documentaries, have you ever seen American Movie? Oh, if you've never seen it, and anybody listening out there, American Movie is like this 1997 documentary that they made about a guy named Mark Borchardt in Wisconsin, who's trying to be an independent filmmaker, is sort of like down on his luck, a bit of a slacker. Like, he's in his 30s, living with his parents in the 90s, but his dream is of making a movie. And the documentary follows him first trying to make a feature film, and then realizing he doesn't have the resources to do it, and then he just tries to finish a 30-minute movie he started like 3 years prior. It was a very different era of filmmaking where everything had to be done by hand, so it was a lot more difficult for him than like your average people, but he's really into the horror movies. And he was talking about like what his favorite movies were, and he has this long talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre specifically, because he said that, which I think this is an apt summary, that to him it looked like those 16mm accident films they'd show you in like Driver's Ed.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I can see it.
So
I can see it.
He said there was like an authenticity to that in that respect that you didn't find in mainstream movies. And I'm like, yeah, I could agree with that.
Well, I don't know if I see that. I just meant from like a visual standpoint, but also keep in mind for me, like Driver's Ed movies came out of the 90s. And so I don't know if that makes a difference in terms of, comparing the two really. But I get what you're saying, kind of like the you can't help but watch kind of feelings that you get. So that's really what it did for me. But enough about horror movies. That was last episode. What's going on with you this week, Hal?
Oh, this week? Well, I took a nice vacation. Got to go down to Cape May for a couple of days, which was very nice. Ate some good food. Drank a lot of very punny-themed beers.
Love that.
Yeah, because there's lots of puns around there. Took Droney out, too, for the first time in a while. I'm a little afraid to fly Droney at this point because I guess you weren't at the Q&A for VidJam, but so you didn't hear the story about how like the drone almost killed Hope.
I did. I heard about it crashing.
So it crashed in a cornfield, which was like a 40-minute like walk through a long cornfield to find the drone. But something happened to the battery cell and it got displaced. And then like at 30% battery, as I was shooting like the final shot where the drone's above Hope and going up, I wanted to do another take because she was just kind of lying like that and like with her hands behind her head. It didn't really look like a horror movie end. But then the drone, it was at 30% battery and it just decided to land. It said like I had no controls over it. It was just going to land. And Toby and I were like 200 yards away from her because it's a big cornfield. And so we were both screaming like, oh, get out of the way. And of course she didn't hear anything. And it landed like 1.5 feet away from her head. And she was like, oh yeah, that was almost a thing.
Oh my Lord.
But so I took the drone out on the beach. I did shoot something for Ashley Madavi and Sam Melville's movie with the drone after, and it was perfectly fine. But when I took it on the beach, it didn't start up the first time because it said the battery cell had been damaged. And so in true IT crowd fashion, I just turned it off, turned it back on again, and it flew fine. But I was a little afraid flying it over the ocean because I was like, what if it decides to just land and Droney will have a burial at sea? So
I always thought Droney would be buried. Well, I thought he would be cremated. That was my... Yeah.
Yeah, he'd have to catch fire first, so...
Well, yeah, but then I'm hoping that the situation deems that he catches fire and then is cremated.
Yeah. An interesting thing about, like, I guess backtracking a little bit, but this vacation, was actually the first time, and I thought this the entire, 3 days I was down there, that I've actually relaxed on a vacation in years, I think. Because generally if I would take trips, there'd be a lot of anxiety built up, even though I enjoy it, I don't know, every single day I just sort of woke up feeling more refreshed, happy, not nervous about things because of the antidepressants. And an interesting side effect too, which I want to monitor this and think about it a little bit more before I put it out in the universe as being concrete. But I hadn't been drinking almost at all as I've been taking Zoloft because I wanted to acclimate properly and everything. Where everybody's always like, oh yeah, you don't take alcohol with antidepressants. But I've talked to other people who are on them, and they're like, yeah, you can do it occasionally, just don't overdo it.
Yeah.
And I woke up zero hungover or anything, like any of the days I was drinking. And I kind of like looked it up to just see like what the deal with that is. And again, internet research is, you take it with a grain of salt, but some people had said that basically what alcohol does is once it wears off, if you're actually asleep, it triggers an anxiety reflex that you don't know while you're asleep, which is why you get hungover, because you're too, among other things, there's the withdrawal and you just didn't get any sleep the last night and you can never get back to sleep. But like if you are on SSRIs, they say in some cases, some people just don't have that anxiety reflex. So you just like don't wake up and have that sleep problem.
Interesting. Because I mean, Ryan shared with me once or twice that he sometimes doesn't get hungover when he thinks he really should have.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that has something to do with it. Me, myself, I take my antidepressants with alcohol. So, I mean, I am fine, clearly. So
You are so well adjusted.
Absolutely. But I mean, eventually you're going to mix in the SSRI with the alcohol. Like, you can't really avoid that because unless you're going to go completely dry and get on the wagon. But, I mean, I've found that it hasn't been a huge problem for me, but also Hal and I are not doctors, so don't listen to us.
Do not listen to us. This is just like rando observations as I'm scrubbing the internet that I'm taking with a grain of salt or sand.
And you should too.
Yeah, and you should too. Absolutely. But just I thought that was an interesting, like, regardless of if that's actually what's happening to me on this, it is interesting to hear that, like, alcohol and then drinking triggers an anxiety reflex at some point, because I do, like, there have been nights where I've been drinking heavily in the past that's happened. Like, I'll wake up at, like, 3:30 in the morning, and I'll be going in and out of sleep until, like, whenever I decide to get out of bed, but it's not good quality sleep. And so, like, they said one of the reasons, or one of the signs that the SSRIs are working is that you have better quality sleep. So that's been
That was something I noticed when I started taking, it's called fluoxetine, but it's like an off-brand Prozac. But yeah, I noticed that too. I was getting better sleep. So
yeah, so that's been part of that journey as well. And like, there are a lot of other things too that I'll articulate for like a later podcast that have been like,
ruminating.
Yeah, like I guess one of the other ones, and this is something I really did want to like put together more into words. Like one of the weird anxiety reflexes I've had my whole life, which friends of mine unfortunately have occasionally seen, is like being left out of things triggers like some sort of weird reflex with me a lot of times. And like if I perceived among groups of friends that was being like deliberately excluded for something, even if it wasn't the case, like I sometimes would like snap on my friends or something like that. Just like,
I can't imagine that. Like you being pissy.
It does happen. Like, or at least it did happen a lot. And like, and I've talked with a lot of them about this because my friends are awesome and they're kind of like, yeah, this was out of character, Hal. What exactly happened here? And we sort of like talked about things and usually ended with hugs and nice things like that. But in the last month, like none of that has been permeating in my brain at all. Like I feel very like relaxed. It's weird. Like this is why I wanted to like eke this out a little bit more before I put it out there. But I don't feel the same sort of resentment, anxiety I feel if I'm just because I don't perceive like I'm being left out of things or being attacked. I guess paranoia would be the better way to describe that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've mentioned this before in that just, being on this kind of medication does kind of, I can't explain it. Once again, not a doctor, but it does have some like unintended consequences, first of all, but also, you end up being able to just really understand things better and just kind of like feel like be in the moment a little better in terms of understanding what's going on around you, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does make like total sense. And it's I don't know, I felt like I've been more productive too, just because I'm not scared to do things, although I have a whole house full of things to do when we get done today. But I don't know, I'm pretty at peace with everything. So
yeah, well, it's good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I'm glad you took a vacation. Vacations are good.
Yeah, it was very nice. It was perfect too. It was like 68 degrees while I was down there most days. There were people swimming. I wasn't that brave.
Oh, no, you wouldn't catch me doing that in this weather.
But yeah, that's all I really have to say about that. It was nice. I played Powerball twice because I can play out of state. I won $4 on one ticket, which is the best I've done significantly since ever playing Powerball. Nice. And I have another ticket for tonight too because it's $1.6 billion.
Oh, that's a cool talking point. $1.6 billion. What would you do with $1.6 billion?
Oh man, I thought about this so much when I was like, because on my vacation, like I basically just walks around the boardwalk and beach all day. And actually I was thinking that because like, that's kind of like, we all reasonably understand, especially since I work for the lottery, that if you're playing a game that has a 1 in 300 million chance of hitting, like you're not going to hit it, but you're kind of just paying $10 to like dream about it for a couple of days.
And I've heard about that a lot, is like a lot of people play not really to win, but just to kind of like pay for a little bit of daydreaming, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't think there's much wrong with that, seeing as I've wasted money on like way more trivial things. And like I talk to Ryan about this all the time because Ryan has beef with the lottery. We've talked about this before, but beef. You and I have talked about this, but not on the podcast. But just like he just has this huge thing against the lottery, hates the whole thing, doesn't like every time I kind of tell him like, hey, I got a little lottery ticket just, you know, to be silly. And he's just like, why would you do that? Like he gets straight up angry, not like with me, but like I've never seen him so like just about a topic before.
I've never seen him about a topic before.
I know. He's just so kind-hearted. I tried to talk him into getting on the podcast today because he wasn't doing anything. I was like, you know, you could come on the podcast. You could come talk to me and Hal.
He's always welcome.
Fun. And he was like, I'll think about it. And then he didn't. But I think that would be fun at some point to get him on the podcast, talk about stuff.
Ryan's welcome here anytime. He's a friend to everyone.
Yes.
The lottery stuff, so like I understand it is like state-run gambling, and it is my job too. So like I have a different perspective of this than pretty much anybody.
Hal is sponsored by the Pennsylvania Lottery.
But there were some interesting like so we just had our 50th anniversary like sort of.
You're looking good for 50, Hal.
Oh yeah, we're bad, but one of the things I talked about was like the history of the lottery, like why it was founded in the 70s, and it was mostly because like all the things that the lottery does today were already being done by like bookies and other like independently sort of organized crime places. Like an interesting thing they told us was that actually their daily number was just what the last 3 numbers for the closing of the Dow market was every day. Like that was what the number would be for these bookie institutions. And I'm like, well, that's really interesting because that is a totally randomized 3 numbers that you really couldn't get to. But they had all these like bookie things and all these like other organizations that were essentially doing the same thing, and none of the money was going to the state. So the state got in on it, and that's why we have a lottery.
Which is what's going to happen to every other illegal thing.
Well, it's interesting. So there's a like I didn't think I was going to talk about the lottery today, but
no, that's fine. We'll talk about whatever. It's depression vacation, you know. Should just be called. I've been doing that the last couple of days. I don't know what it is.
It's called a spoonerism because I do this all the time too.
I thought it was a Freudian slip.
I had well, it's like because you just put something in the wrong order, right? Yeah, I don't think it's a Freudian slip because I had a really good friend who she was taking psychology courses at the same time, like we were really hanging out. And she said they were called spoonerisms because I do this all the time too, where I'll put the order of words wrong. In fact, sometimes if I'm writing down a sentence or something, I accidentally will just start in the middle of a word sometimes. Like if you were writing beef, for instance, I'll start with EEF and then just put a B at the end. And I don't know why that is. It's just my brain operates in those weird ways.
Yeah. Anyway, the lottery.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't have much else to say about that, but
okay.
You were just saying like the lottery is like going to be controlling all of a lot of these things, and kind of the way that works out is there are Pennsylvania games of skill that are like all over the state that are completely not run by the lottery.
Right. I know about that because when I worked in banking, you know, those organizations they got a bank somewhere, so you know, I would see like games of chance, small games of chance. From like the American Legions and VFWs and things like that. They run that kind of thing. They
make tons of money, and they're not regulated by anything, basically. And so they operate in this weird like legal gray area where they're not illegal, but they're not legal at the same time. And it's like, I used to only see them in like places here and there, but now like if I go into any sort of gas station, there's always a PA Games of Skill where like people, you know, they have like five or six of these in the the gas station is literally
Yeah.
right next to lottery headquarters. So.
They have that in my in the dive bar I go to for karaoke. They have like a bunch of those machines.
Yeah. In fact, I remember like 3 or 4 years ago when I was doing like the mics in Lancaster, I remember Jackie Benhayen said to me that like, oh, I won $500 on one of those PA games of skill, and I thought of you. I'm like, yeah, that's not me. It's trying to put us out of business.
So if you ever win anything in the lottery, say a little prayer to our Lord and Savior Hal.
Yeah.
That's good. No, I do think about what I would do with like a bunch of money.
Yeah.
Because, I just have very small dreams, I just don't want to be in debt anymore.
Yeah,
That's
that'd
like
be nice.
my primary goal. So.
But I wouldn't pay off my mortgage because my interest rate is so low. Actually, if I had, was it 700 million cash, I probably would do that. But
Yeah, I mean, just pay that off by like 4 other houses while you're at it.
yeah, well, I was thinking about, like, that's what was going down in my head is like, okay, who would I give money away to? And I only got up to like $200 million. I'm like, well, shit, I still have 500 in this dream.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to my my brother-in-law like on my way back because we were hanging out, and I was telling him to buy a Powerball ticket. And he's like, oh, yeah, you just got to promise you'll give me $1 million if you win. I was like,
It's like, sure,
I mean,
that's chump change at that point.
Steve, I'm probably going to give you at least 50 times that, maybe more.
Yeah. I mean, I always think about it like that too. It's like if I had 700 million in straight cash, like almost everyone I love would be just living their best lives.
Yeah. I was even thinking that too. I was like, well, I could give like legitimately like 200 grand to everybody I do stand up with, improv with, and it wouldn't even put a dent. Like this would maybe be $20 million of a $700 million cash thing.
Yeah.
Just give everybody money to like, hey, if you want to pay off your house, do that. If you want to use this money to go to Denver, New York, or Los Angeles to try to do comedy, do this. It's a dream fund.
Yeah.
So
No, that's awesome.
yeah,
I hope you win.
me too.
Because then I get 200 grand. So.
Yeah, you can have $210,000.
Yes.
An extra 10. Get something nice for yourself.
I will.
Go make a Star Wars.
A Star Wars. Yeah.
Yeah, so what's going on with Shannon this week?
Start my new job on Monday.
Woo!
New job. Woot, woot. Which is really nice because the old one was sucking the soul straight from my body. So that's nice.
You were saying you had to fire a lot of people, I remember.
Dude, so many people. I had fired more people in the last 4 months than my entire career.
Yeah.
And I've been in management for almost a decade, which is crazy to think about. But like, it's not for me. I can't keep having those conversations,
Yeah.
It was so emotionally draining. Like I was straight up depressed. So thank goodness that this other opportunity arose. I'm getting back into banking, so that's really nice.
Yeah, after like what happened with you with your last job, I'm glad to hear that that's like getting back into it.
Yeah. And that's really, honestly, I like where my passion is, and I really just kind of, I miss it a lot. So I'm excited to get back into it. The company is great. Everybody I've met so far is really great, so I'm excited to get started.
Yeah, I remember you were saying that like on previous episodes that you place like an outsized identity portion on your job and your ability to like sustain yourself. So it's very good to hear like you're starting a new job and what you want to do and all that.
And it pays a lot more. So that's
money
really
is always good.
Yes. Well, and the other part of it too is I was just thinking about this because when you were asking me, what do you want to talk about on the podcast? I was like, well, I'm feeling some pretty intense imposter syndrome right now.
Oh my God, yeah.
So, I mean, because even with with the new job of them being like, here, we're going to give you this job. Not only that, we're going to give you the job you didn't think you were going to get because we think you're good enough to do it. Because like it was the same position, but like in 2 different locations, and one location, or I'm actually going to be running 2 branches instead of just 1 branch.
Ooh.
So they asked me, they were like, do you want to run, what do you think about running 2 branches versus 1 branch? And I was like, well, I think one would be way harder than the other, but not unachievable. And so I was like, okay, based off of that, they're probably going to give me the 1 branch. And then they called me back and they were like, yeah, we're going to give you the 2 branches. We're going to do this, that. I'm getting like an unofficial officer title. Well, it is official, but it's like an officer title for like the area. And I'm like, you haven't even met me in person yet. And like, I'm just like, you have a lot of faith in me and I appreciate that. Cue the self-doubt.
Yeah, just like I feel like everybody just eventually has to get some sort of good job luck to land a job where you can actually make a living doing it.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the luck just fell on you. Not to mention that it was a field that you're very proficient in. So, so you don't have to feel like an imposter.
Yeah, I'm working on that.
Imposter syndrome's an interesting topic though, because like when I first encountered the term, it was used mostly like in circles with like women executives and minorities that like they would get put into situations where just because of the way the world is against women and minorities moving up, they would feel they didn't deserve it. But it's interesting too, because I've been talking like lots of white men like myself also feel imposter syndrome quite often. And it's about like, it's so funny because it seems like either you like have imposter syndrome where you feel like you're going to be found out and you're a fraud, or you're on the complete opposite end of the spectrum where you're like Dunning-Kruger, where, you're so inept at doing something that you think you're awesome at it.
Yeah.
And there doesn't seem to be a lot of middle ground with a lot of these people.
Yeah, no, you hit the nail right on the head on the point I wanted to make of like, this is the complete opposite of what we were talking about a couple episodes ago. And it's also just weird for me because I've always been perceived as like what's the word I'm looking for? I don't think it's one word, but I've always been like, oh my gosh, you're so mature for your age. You're so this for your age and that and the other thing. And so I've always kind of felt that I've been handed things earlier than when I've been ready for them. And so I'm not really sure when that's going to stop. So that's where I'm at in terms of life, I guess.
Is that a phrase you don't like hearing? Like that you're so mature for your age? Like,
it's, I don't hate it because at this point, like I'm 26, eventually people are going to stop saying that I'm young. And so, I mean, I'm going to milk that for as long as possible. But what I've really hated more than that is that, when people, going back to the family trauma thing, when I tell people my story about how I grew up and things like that, when a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, you became such a strong person, this really made you into who you are and you are XYZ because of this thing that happened to you. I despise that.
Yeah.
I despise it so much. And I know that it's done with the best of intentions. I know that they're trying to say that, despite all of these things, you're a great person and you survived. On the other hand, too, they don't just say that. They'll say, oh, shit. It was right there.
It just died trying to get out of your brain.
I know. And this is my second cup of coffee today, so that's going to tell you about how well today is going to go.
Yeah, I don't hear a ton of those things necessarily. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I did have an interaction with my mom, I guess this was like maybe 2 weeks ago, because we were talking about like, I feel like anxiety really runs in my family a lot. Like I can only really speak for myself, but like talking to my sisters too, I feel like that's a thing with them as well. And my dad is like a huge procrastinator, like in every way, shape, and form. And the more I'm like talking with my therapist about like how my anxiety has made me a procrastinator and all of that, like the more I'm understanding that these are actually like behaviors that my dad exhibits too. And my mom was complaining about like him not helping with a major project around the house. He says he's going to do it and then he's not going to do it. And I'm like, Mom, Dad probably suffers from like a lot of anxiety that just makes it really like crippling for him to even start doing something because it's hard. Falling short of saying this is what I experience. And I even like told her, I'm like, yeah, I have like extreme anxiety too. And she's like, oh, you don't have anxiety. You accomplish so much. You do so much stuff.
Yep.
And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to respond to this.
Yeah.
Like, again, said with the best of intentions, like, I firmly believe that if somebody says something like that, like as an accidental microaggression, they're really just kind of saying what they want to hear.
Or what they think will comfort you.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, when I've had relatives die, they other people will go directly to like religious comforts and things like that, and they'll be like, oh well, he's in heaven now looking down on you, and I'm like, I know that you're trying to be comforting, but that's just not what I need to hear right now. And it just came to me what I was trying to say before was that so a lot of people are like, oh, but you have Ryan now, you have his family now, like you're creating your own family and like you're beyond it. And it doesn't mean that I didn't still want not to go through those things.
Oh, yeah. I mean, who would want to go through those things?
Well, and that's the thing, too, where they say, like, well, it made you such a strong person. I'm like, I didn't need to be strong. I needed to be loved. And, like, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, yes, I know that you're trying to compliment me. I know you're trying to, like, make me feel better. But it still sucks. Like, I didn't want it. I didn't want to go through those things. I don't revel in the fact that I went through those things. Like, oh, look at me. I'm so special and different. When all I think about is, like, how I'm on the other side of this glass and desperately wanting to be like everybody else.
Yeah. That's basically how I, like, grew up, too. Like, there's a lot of other layers to it, and it's not as bad as you at all. But I feel like I was encouraged to be weird by my parents, like, in bad ways. Essentially, like, there was this period, I was actually just thinking, it's so funny how, like, you can forget so many big things in your life until just, like, a random memory brings them up. And I was remembering when I was on this vacation, actually, like, when I was between, like, 4th and 6th grade, for some particular reason, I just started singing super loudly in all of the church things that we would go to. Maybe it was part attention, maybe it was, like, cry for help because I was, like, being bullied and, like, a very anxious kid in general. And it was something that, like, made me a target for more, like, bullying. But at that point, it was already, like... It was just, like, added to the tab. Like, I'm already getting picked on for so many things. And my mom said later, like, when I was a grown-up, she was like, yeah, your father always encouraged you to keep doing that. And I thought that was a bad thing to keep doing because you were just making yourself more of a target. And I feel like there were a lot of those kind of behaviors that were enforced. And, like, a lot of times I just wanted to be a normal person, which I'm not, for better or for worse.
Yeah. Well, and for me, too, like, I wish that, like, there had been... Now, obviously, when I got older and my dad came back into the picture, like, I did have it. But for the period of time where it was just us and my mom, I didn't have anybody to, like, tell me, hey, that's fucking weird. Don't do that.
Yeah.
So, like, I had this weird habit. And listen, I'm going to preface this by saying that I have never harmed anything outside of, like, killing bugs. Okay? Never laid a hand on an animal, person, anything like that. But when I was a kid, if I found a dead animal, I would take its parts. And, yeah, see, that's a weird thing.
It is weird, but...
And then, like, I would bring them home and be like, look at these bones and look at these teeth and the things like that. And my mom was like, wow, that's so cool. And then I would, like, take those things to school and I'd be like, look at these bones. And so I sometimes wonder if that was, like... Because, like, I never actually did anything, but, like, is that low-key serial killer behavior? We don't know.
I think given your own, like what you were raised in, it's very reasonable to assume that your brain just thought that it wasn't a real, like, animal or real carcass because you were raised to believe that the real world was not the actual real world.
Yeah.
So it could have just been, like, video game logic being applied to your brain.
Possibly.
There's a lot of layers to unpack there, and I don't think any of them are serial killery.
Okay. Because I worry about that sometimes.
I read this, there were, like, on a note that, back when Cracked used to do, like, more investigative articles, there was an article that somebody wrote saying that they had, like, a weird condition where they weren't a violent person at all, and they never, like, exhibited violence, but for whatever reason, their psychosis, they just plotted the death of their friends and family in their head all the time as daydreams. And I forget what the condition is, but I looked it up, and it's actually, like, a real condition where... Again, these aren't violent people. They're just, like, plotting your death all the time.
Well, it's like intrusive thoughts, you know, like, it's like, you know, when you're, they're all over TikTok. I just recently saw one from Call Me Chris. She's one of my favorite TikTok content creators. But she had a knife and she was cutting a peach and she, like, laughed at herself and she was like, I could cut my finger off right now, like, and just do it. So, yeah, I think, like, that's pretty common. I mean, I've definitely plotted deaths. But, like, would never do it, like, unless somebody asked me to. I mean, I've been pretty listen, so many times, like, I just not irrationally, but, like, I'll walk into a room and, like, some of my coworkers would be like, ugh, I'm so mad. And I'd be like, who do I need to beat up? But, like, I'm like, no, like, seriously, I'm not above beating someone in a dark alley for you if you asked me to. Like, it's totally fine. Nobody ever takes me up on it.
Yeah, I was the exact opposite because like being a bigger person, particularly as I was getting picked on a lot in school, my parents actually encouraged me to just go over and slug the people who were making fun of me.
Yeah.
Which was a huge conflicting message because the school, like, very obviously, like, if you punch somebody, you're going to get in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
But also, I just didn't really want to. Like, that wasn't in my nature, which is also why I think I sucked as a football player, too. Was unless you just, like, pushed me to the brink, I really didn't want to hit anybody hard or, like, hurt anybody, myself included.
Yeah.
Like, there were a few, like, I don't talk about football very much in general because it was not a great time in my life, but there were a few times that I was like completely laid out by like, say, a senior when I was a freshman, or like my head would bounce against the turf and like I really hurt my shoulder badly, which to this day I think still is a bit of a lingering injury. And like I always, like, the first thing I would think of laying there is like, am I hurt forever? Like, am I never going to recover from this? And like that was part of why that was terrifying for me.
You know what? I've always had this feeling too of like anytime something goes wrong with my body, I'm like, is this like a permanent thing now?
Oh yeah.
Like just pains that I get. I have a condition, it's called TC syndrome, and it causes the cartilage in my chest to become inflamed.
Oh God.
So it used to be really, really bad when I was a teenager. And what would happen is I would get these stabbing pains in my chest. Felt like an ice pick was being like shoved into my chest.
Oh my God.
And it would happen on either side. So I was like, is it my heart? Is it like, I don't understand. So we found out it was this condition that still bugs me to this day. But like, you know, I'd feel it and I'm like, am I having a heart attack? I'm 14. Like, you know, I was at a high school football game last night, and I have beef with high school football, in the sense that like, I don't think high schoolers I don't think anybody should be playing football because it's a very dangerous game.
Well, that's sorry, I'll let you finish.
No, you're fine.
I was going to interject that like a worry I do have, like speaking of like the permanent harm sort of thing, is like that they say like CTE and that in general isn't like long exposure to hits like over time necessarily. It's kind of like every single time you take a hit to the head, you just get like a ticket into the CTE lottery and it might manifest later in life. Or every time you get a concussion, because I definitely had concussions playing high school football that I was told to just like, and I didn't even like start in a lot of these games, but they just would throw me back into practice or anything like that. And so I vaguely wonder like, you know, is that something that might affect me later in life? I really hope not. And that's why people have like, because a very like common negating term that people talk about with CTE with football players is all like, oh, they're millionaires, they know what they signed up for. But one of my favorite football writers used to write that they're not doing that for the millionaires. They're doing it for the hundreds of thousands of college players who will never receive a paycheck. They're doing it for the even more number of high school players who will never even play in college. And all these kids are getting hurt. And so a lot of neurologists have even said that like until you turn 18, you shouldn't be taking any real tackles in football.
No, and I agree. I mean, like, so I think I mentioned before, Ryan's been doing the marching band for the East Pennsboro High School.
Yeah.
And so I've been going to their football games, and just the number of injuries on the field, like, it feels like way more than when I was in school. But like, it's just these kids, I mean, these are children that like are in some cases like can be permanently hurt for the rest of their lives. And what's it for, you know? And like, you know, and there's this guy who always manages to sit behind me in the stands and he's always like making comments and like, they should have done this and what's the coach doing and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, imagine having hard opinions about high school football. And like, it's so funny. And there was another woman during an away game that was literally like screaming, like swearing at the top of her lungs, like fuck all to the referee and everything. And I was like, these are children. Like, I'm like, unless you have a high school student like who's playing football that there's a talent scout from like the top football university in the country, like you need to calm the fuck down. Like, I just don't. I understand like people are into their sports and everything like that, but I just don't think it's worth it.
Yeah, so it's an interesting like another thing I think about a lot is I've like changed as a person and like, you know, taken a deep hard look at what I was like in my 20s is I was for all that much I hated playing football and it terrified me. I actually grew to love football like crazily like 2 years after I stopped playing it because I do believe that at its core it's the best game. Like it's the most intricate, it's the most schematic. best strategy wise, and there's so many different variations that you can play with it. But like when I was in my 20s, I was like a super fan of both Notre Dame and the Steelers, and like I would not miss games, like social interactions. Sorry, I'm not doing that right now. We're going to, we're going to watch the Steeler game instead. And like I would get crazy into it. And then as when I moved back from LA, basically, and because all of my friends in LA were also crazy Steeler fans and reinforced this behavior. And then I got back here and I just started doing more social things, like getting involved in improv and doing more movies and just having fun with friends. And eventually it just took a backseat. It was like, yeah, if I'm available, like to watch a game and nothing's going on, that could be fun. But like, and my dad is still very much like super into these things where like it's appointment TV that he worships at the church, essentially, of Notre Dame and the Steelers. Which this is kind of what fandom is to a lot of people. And my mom has said on a couple of occasions too that like part of my dad's connection to specifically Notre Dame football, because he went to Notre Dame and that was like some of the best years of his life. So there's some nostalgia there. But she also says that like since he wasn't married and didn't have kids until he was 40 anyway, and didn't have a lot of family in the area. So she said that essentially Notre Dame football kind of was his family, which was a kind of sad thing to hear, but also it makes a lot more sense as to why like it's such a thing for him particularly. And do you ever watch Nathan For You?
That sounds so familiar.
I guess I
can't place it.
It's a long story, but like in the last episode of Nathan For You, they make a feature-length documentary where they go to try to find the long-lost love of a guy who was like a bit player on the show. And it's really interesting, but like the guy is from Arkansas and he also adores University of Arkansas football. And he says straight up that that's his family. And that made me think of my dad in that situation too. Like, I think also, like getting back to sports though, as I've calmed down from super sports fandom and treat it more like just, it's fun to watch if it's on, but it's not going to rule my life. I think it's something that just society has created a way for people to get really obsessed with that and not focus on things that are much more important. Like politics, for instance. Like, you get distracted by your super football fandom, and I think this is also too why so many people have gotten angry at like the racial equality protests that have happened in NFL games.
Yeah, because they watch it for the escapism.
Yeah,
and that's also kind of like another criticism and a lot of other things. So, you could very easily argue that yes, sports, it distracts people from what's really going on, but so does like television.
Oh yeah.
So for example, when I don't watch Grey's Anatomy, but I mean I probably would, but there's just so much of it now, I just feel like I'd never get caught up.
It's been on the air for like 20 years.
Dude, I'm not doing that. So but they started incorporating COVID into their storyline.
Of course.
And I was reading articles about how like people were upset because they were like, this is what's going on, and we're trying to distract ourselves from this thing that's going on. Like, yes, it makes for good television, but, wait until it's over. We're trying to watch. A lot of us were binge watching shows during the pandemic because it distracted us from like the horribleness of it all. And so to incorporate it into the thing that we're trying to use to escape from it, like maybe don't do that.
That's what Charlie Booker has said too, that there hasn't been a new season of Black Mirror in years. And I read in an interview that Charlie Booker said that he's not doing one because the world is Black Mirror at this point. Like, he said that, like, I mean, he has ideas and it is coming back soon. I've been reading, but I
hope so.
But he's been saying like the world is too depressing for this, right? In fact, the only things he's done the last few years is he's done these the Death to 2020 and Death to 2021 like mockumentaries for Netflix, which were very funny because he has a keen social eye for a lot of things. But I thought that was like an interesting like. No, Black Mirror is a functioning a thing for a functioning society.
Right.
We need to get our shit cleaned up before we can think about dystopias and not be depressed again.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, and it's so weird. I think about the world a lot.
Yeah, me too.
And it depresses me. But I just think a lot about like, why are we here? Like, not even on an existential point, just like, how did we get here? And I was talking to Ryan's dad when the student loan forgiveness program was announced. And Ryan's dad is a conservative. And it had come up. I brought it up, but it was only because I was like, guys, I'm going to have no student debt because my loans are under $20,000 and I had the Pell Grant.
Nice.
Well, having the Pell Grant's not the greatest thing in the world.
I know, but you get more.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, despite the circumstances, like, it'll be a good thing for me. And so they had, like, I watched them kind of like short circuit because they were like, because they're against it, but here I am, their future daughter-in-law, like, this is something that is going to be ultimately good for me. They're like, we don't approve of it, but like, we're glad it's going to help you. Like, kind of like it was really interesting to watch that kind of like, watch them try to reconcile those two feelings. Yeah. And I love them very much, so don't get me wrong with that. But, he had asked me a bunch of questions because we were kind of arguing it a little bit, not like maliciously, but just having some,
It's nice not to have malicious arguments with people, isn't it?
We were just having like positive discourse. And he asked me like, well, what about this? What about that? So one of his arguments was like, well, what about people who, like, I paid for school, I paid for everything, like, shouldn't I get a refund? And I was like, yeah, I think it was really terrible that you had to pay for school.
Yeah.
Like, and I told him, I was like, well, if we had universal education, then, this wouldn't be an issue. Or, and he was like, well, what about the taxes? I was like, well, I don't get to choose where my taxes go right now. What's the difference?
It's a drop in the hat compared to what they spend on the national defense budget.
And that's what I said, too. I was like, listen, I would love for my tax dollars to go to universal health care, public education. Like, I'd love for it to go there, but it doesn't. And I don't get a say in that. And is that not also, like, something, that's kind of bad? So we had to talk about it. And I was like, listen, I don't particularly, I have a bachelor's degree in political science. I don't particularly think we have a good system.
No, not at all.
We don't. And honestly, I think we should scrap the whole thing and start over. I think that we should all go back to hunting and gathering and go from there. Like, I straight up just from where we began as a human race to right now, the complexity of it all and how we've just made things way harder for ourselves as a species baffles me.
Yeah, this is something I will talk about in future episodes too, because I was very much into the conservative ideology from like 18 until like maybe 29 or so. And there are a lot of mental gymnastics you have to do to buy some of the arguments that they make. And so like, I know all of the bad faith arguments the conservatives make on certain things. And with student loan forgiveness, like, this is the big one. And this was something my friends tried to like teach me in college. As I was like spouting, like I was big into Ayn Rand in college, and my friends were like, the way that actually the economy works is the more money and availability that the masses, like more people have to their money, the more they pour into the economy, and so that makes the economy more robust. As opposed to when you give a ton of money to billionaires, they don't reinvest enough of it, if any, into companies, including jobs and wages and living wages for people too. So the consumer availability to actually buy goods goes down and the economy is worse. So like with student loan forgiveness, you have $20,000 now, which you're going to pour, like you're not going to let that sit in a bank account. You're going to like make that a down payment to a house, or you're going to like do things to build your life essentially and reinvest into the economy that way.
Exactly.
So there are a lot of components to exactly this argument where if you're giving more money, whether it be like stimulus ideas or like, student loan forgiveness, this money all goes back into the economy because people aren't going to be sitting and hoarding on it too much.
Exactly. And that was another thing that I brought up too, is exactly like you said, so many of these people, I mean, these aren't teenagers that are getting this relief. These are 20, 30, 40-year-old people.
I qualify for 10 grand, which is going to change my life.
I mean, and it is life-changing. And I was saying this to Ryan's dad, and now I'm saying it here, is that so many of these people are going to be putting down payments on houses.
Yeah.
So many of them are going to be starting small businesses. So many of them are going to be buying a new car, or it really just, they're not going to sit on that money. It's going to be reinvested back into the economy, like you just said.
Yeah. In fact, like I recently got a house like back in February, which was a long dream of mine that I didn't think I was ever going to be able to afford.
Yeah, I'm there right now. I'm trying to imagine what that's going to be like because I'd very much like to buy a house.
Yeah, it's great. I would recommend it. 10 out of 10. Except I have so many leaves all over my yard I have to clean up today. But the only reason I could afford that, because I was living very, like, when I had my apartment pre-COVID, I wasn't necessarily living hand to mouth. Like, I was living comfortably, but, like, I was not able to save, like, very much money at all. Like, maybe $50 to $100 a month if I was lucky. But when the student loan pauses happened at COVID, like, suddenly I had, because I was paying the full amount of my loans every month to try to, like, resuscitate my credit from bad years in California. Which worked, but like I had $680 a month all of a sudden that I wasn't paying in student loan debt. And over the course of like a year and a half, that morphed into just enough to like put an offer in for a down payment on a house that I own now. And without those student loan payments, I never, like, all that money would have just been gone towards a balance, which I'm never going to see the end of anyway. So
right. Well, so I'm banking on my stepmom not actually listening to my podcast. So if you're listening, like, hey, good for you. You're listening to my podcast. That's so nice. Thank you. But for she over the last 2 years with COVID, she's like, have you been still paying on your loans? Because with the pause, you should still pay on your loans. And I was like, oh yeah, totally. Didn't pay a dime on my loans. Because I told everybody who would listen, I was like, listen, when I voted for Joe Biden, I asked for one thing and one thing only.
Student loan forgiveness.
Student loan forgiveness. I was like, you need to have two things to be my president at this point. Not Donald Trump and give me student loan forgiveness. Those were the two. I got the first one and I was waiting for the second one. And I was like, Daddy Biden, you knew the drill. You knew the deal when you got my vote. So and so he finally made good on it. And I'm like, there you go. All right.
It's something. Yeah.
I mean, like, anything else he does, fuck it. I don't care. That was the only thing. Like, I don't care if he's good president, bad president. I just wanted my student loans forgiven. That was all I wanted.
I will say he's kind of a blah president, in my opinion.
He's like, kind of, it's funny because, like, I talk about this a lot, where I don't think we've had like an iconic president in a really long time.
Oh, now, we have,
except for Obama.
Just for the wrong reasons
well,
we've had.
I loved Obama, and I felt that he was a real breath of fresh air into the presidency. Because like I always, you know, in school you learn about like Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. It's like, okay, well, where's our, like, you know, top tier president? And so, like, for me, like, in my lifetime, I think Obama is that president for me. But like, I mean, I'm still okay with not having a president that I really care about, you know?
I kind of just, like, honestly, I was just happy to have a boring because that's, at his absolute core, Biden is just the most boring person in the world.
Good.
Yeah, which is fine for me right now. Like, I guess if I had to compare him personality-wise, he's probably similar to, like, George H.W. Bush, because that was the first president I even remembered. He was pretty nondescript. He was kind of boring. Nothing huge happened during his presidency, and then he was a one-term president. And, like, yeah. But, you know, I'm fine with boring. My brother-in-law has, going back to the student loan things, too, which this has been true for every time he's been talking about, he's been pretty spot on with the student loan forgiveness and pauses. And he's been saying that he thinks that, like, there's a strong chance that just maybe they'll never resume payments on student loans. Because he said it's essentially like what happened when they paused it is it became a game of political hot potato. Whatever president unpauses those loans is going to cause a recession in the economy, because suddenly people like me will have $680 less a month to reinvest in the economy. And it's really just going down to, like, pay down loans that the Department of Education holds anyway. So as a president, what's more important to you, a robust economy or just collecting some money that the Department of Education has been holding the checks for?
Right. And also watch a bunch of us petty millennials and Gen Zers, as soon as those pauses stop, like, not vote for you.
Yeah.
Or, like, I don't think they would necessarily, like, jump political lines, but those people might not even get out to vote. Well,
that's kind of like the big thing, that because people don't jump political lines anymore, and it's really more about just invigorating your voter base, which is actually something Trump did incredibly well in 2016 for his, like, still improbable victory. Was he just, like, energized for various bad reasons his entire voter base to just get out there and vote. Did the same in 2020, it's worth noting too. Like, isn't that crazy too? Like, the two candidates who got the most votes in U.S. history were both the candidates for the 2020 election. I mean, mail-in voting probably helped that as well.
Yeah.
The accessibility of voting for more people, but it's still crazy that was the voter invigoration for 2020 was the highest turnout for either candidate. So.
Yeah. Well, and I really don't like the the fact that politics have really kind of gone the same way as religion, of like just people blindly, going one way or the other, and not listening to any facts, and not actually taking into account any kind of rational thinking. Ryan and I were talking about this because, the election's coming up next week.
Mm-hmm.
Get out and vote, everybody. It's your civic duty. Unless you don't know what the fuck you're doing, then stay home.
Yeah.
And that's like a huge issue is, people getting out there and they just vote on party lines. They don't like look into the people that they're actually voting for.
Yeah.
And like even I've never been in a situation where I looked at the candidates and jumped party lines, but I still go and I look because especially with like these types of elections, there are multiple candidates in my party and I need to pick the one that is most closely aligned to my values because there are still candidates in my party that I don't agree with.
Until pretty recently, I actually like sort of split. Like I visioned myself as being more of a centrist, like especially in 2016. Did not vote for Trump, just putting that out there.
Yeah.
Definitely because he was an idiot, still is. But
yeah.
One of the people I did vote for, though, like after doing research, was Pat Toomey. Actually, I voted for in 2016. I would not vote for him ever again after that. But one of the reasons that I decided to, like, because I did research everything really well, and Gabrielle Giffords gave him a weird, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Recommendation, endorsement. Who was like do you know who she was? Or
the name sounds familiar.
She was a Democratic lawmaker in Arizona who got shot in the head by somebody.
Oh, shit.
Her husband is now the senator from Arizona, Mark Kelly, I think his name is. But the Giffords had been big on gun control as a result, as you can imagine from that. And Toomey was somebody that had worked with them like for middle of the ground gun legislation. So they like gave him an endorsement. And that kind of meant a lot to me as a centrist candidate. It was like, it's, if somebody crossing party lines to give you an endorsement, you're probably a good person for the job. He at least voted to impeach Trump. So there's that. But
yeah. Well, and I mean, of course, we're falling into these things of like idolizing politicians and like, they're public servants. Celebrities shouldn't be president. I'm going to put that right out there.
Or senators, since that's a huge thing with not just our race, but also like the Georgia race. Although Georgia has a worse candidate for their celebrity than we do. So
yeah. I mean, like celebrities, like I'm not saying that they can't have like political views and influence their fan base. They can do whatever they want. It's a free country, but I have strong feelings about people getting into, and this is like the major issue I have with the American political system, and most political systems, is just that on the surface, a government run by the people sounds and looks really, really good. But when you really look into it, it's like, well, these are people that don't have expertise in law or government or public policy or anything like that. These are some of these, especially like state or regional politicians are just regular people, and that looks good on the surface, but I have major doubts about how well that actually works in process.
Yeah, actually, just as we're like about sort of running out of time. So one of the things I got contracted to do the last couple of weeks was I actually shot a series of political commercials for a woman running for a Democrat running for a state Congress seat in Schuylkill County. And her opponent, it's like an upward climb to be a Democrat in Schuylkill County, period, let alone get elected to office. Her name's Tina Burns, by the way. Shout out. Hope you do well in the election next week. But she was telling, like, we did a lot of research into her opponent, and her opponent is just a well-funded Republican who works in the fuel industry in Schuylkill County. Did not have some of the best reputation. I've asked other friends, like the girl I'm seeing also lives in Schuylkill County, and so I like ran past her, and she's like, "Oh yeah, her opponent is not a well-liked person by a lot of people." And that's his only he didn't work in public policy or anything like that. He just worked for a fuel company, and has the backing of a lot of Republican donors who want to keep that seat red, essentially. So like there's a difference between somebody who sort of worked Fetterman versus Oz is an excellent example of this. You have somebody who worked their way up through the political system, from mayor to lieutenant governor to Senate candidate, and then a celebrity doctor, like who just jumped the line.
Yeah. Yeah, that's ridiculous. All right. Well, sounds like we're getting down to the end of it. So, yes, election in Pennsylvania is November 8th, Tuesday. Get out and vote. It's your civic duty. Like I said.
Make sure you know where your polling place is,
Know where your polling place is. Be an informed voter. Just a quick Google search. It'll take you 15 minutes. Just know who you're voting for.
Yeah, actually, before we started this podcast, I got an odd text that I just wanted to share real quick. Speaking of polling stations, 1 second. Yeah, I got this just about 20 minutes before I left for the house, and it says, Laura, if you're registered to vote at 180 Redwood, public records suggest that you may not have voted yet. This data could be wrong or old. If we got your address right, it looks like you can vote on November 8th at the Belmont School, Patan, and it gives like an address for King of Prussia. First off, my name is not Laura. It never has been Laura. But like, I'm always super suspicious of like sending out mass texts like this because I feel like I don't trust whoever this person was to tell me what my polling station is. So like, check your polling station, vote, participate in the political process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't be a sheep.
Yeah.
So get out and vote. That's good stuff. Have a fantastic week.
Yeah.
Hal?
Yeah, that's all I got. So thanks for taking an hour and 1 minute vacation from your depression, even though we talked about depressive political problems, and I'm sure it'll come up a lot more in the future as well. So yeah, but thank you all so much for listening. I've been Hal.
I've been Shannon.
And this was Depression Vacation. Have a wonderful week.